What is this case about, if not asylum? Please tell me. What is this about if it's not about the asylum system in this country? Abdul Ezedi came here from Afghanistan in 2016, was turned down for asylum twice, committed a sexual offence where he flashed a woman, attempted to pull her trousers down, and I only use this word once because of the time of day, began masturbating at a bus stop, had major inconsistencies in his story about whether he was a Shia or Sunni Muslim, how his brother actually died in Afghanistan, and whether he was really now a Christian, having been accepted into the faith without knowing what the Old Testament was. This is a man who was considered such a risk that the Baptist Church drew up a safeguarding contract for the safety of parishioners because of his sex assault and exposure convictions. He had to be accompanied everywhere by someone else, whilst in the church, clearly not a condition that was going to be met anywhere outside the church. And yet at the third attempt, despite all of this, Abdul Ezedi was granted asylum in the UK. Such was Ezedi's full conversion to Christianity that he was given a Muslim burial, it's reported, with his funeral held at a mosque in East London. This is, despite what ministers say, about asylum, isn't it? What I find incredible is that the judge who granted him asylum knew all of this background before his asylum claim was granted. It's news to us today because of the good work of various media outlets, but the judge knew all of this beforehand. So can anyone understand how, with all this background info about this man, can anyone understand or explain how he was granted asylum? It is, isn't it, this tale about asylum? It might be a long hour, this, but I am really interested to hear what justification there may be for allowing this man at the third attempt, with all the info available about him, to stay in this country. If you have a justification, if you think you can reason your way through this mess, then I am all ears. Clearly a judge could, but either I'm not seeing what the judge saw or I'm not seeing it in the way that they saw it. I'm not seeing it correctly. So please come on and correct me if I'm getting this wrong, because I just cannot understand. I couldn't understand before this information came to light. Now we have more information about what this man was up to, what conditions were placed on the safety of others because of him when he was apparently accepted into the Christian faith, because of the inconsistencies that even the judge said existed in his story about himself. I can't for the life of me understand how he could have been granted asylum in this country. I don't understand why the Home Office hadn't, and they had the powers to at the time, removed him from the country and taken him back to Afghanistan after he committed a sexual offence. 0345 6060 973. If you agree with the minister it's not about asylum, what's it about? If you agree with the decision to grant him asylum, how is it justified? Can you, even if you don't believe it's right that he was given asylum, can you even attempt to justify the thinking of the judge in granting him asylum? 4:09. Louise Calvey is independent refugee and asylum specialist. Thanks for coming on the programme, Louise. It's good to see you again. Where to start with this? Let's start at the decision to grant him asylum for the third time with all this background info.
Well, I think this is really difficult. I'm going to be really hugely honest with you, Tom. I find this whole situation hugely difficult. These offences were horrific. I think there were questions to be asked as to why someone was placed on the sex offenders register, was known to the criminal justice system, was enabled to go out and commit such horrific offences, regardless of status. No one should be able to do that. So I do think there are some significant questions around that that we need.
Well, having posed those questions, I wonder what you think some of the answers are, because for me, one of the answers is pretty straightforward. I'm afraid if you commit a crime of that nature, particularly of that nature, actually, and you're here trying to claim asylum, I don't think the two can sit together.
And to be honest with you, Tom, that would typically be the case. I don't know. I know everyone says this, and I don't mean to sound it like I'm ducking a question here. I don't know the details of this case. I don't know why he wasn't detained following the commitment of those offences.
And deported.
Yeah, I mean, there is a foreign national offender deportation system. Typically, people that commit those sorts of offences are removed. And it's important to note that that's not That's not asylum seekers necessarily.
No,
It's
agreed.
people
Yeah.
that are subject to immigration control.
So just on that, do you think, and again, I understand that it's uncomfortable, the whole thing is uncomfortable, but do you think that whether his status is as a foreign national offender or as an asylum seeker, it sort of doesn't matter in this context? He's committed a crime, very serious offence. It turns out he's also applying for asylum. He should be removed from the country, shouldn't he?
I believe very strongly that there has been failings in the criminal justice system around this individual. In my experience, people that commit those sorts of offences, and it's important to note that when he committed that offence, I think he had already been refused asylum at that stage. It is unusual for someone of that situation to not be detained and removed.
So that's a yes. He really should have been.
Yes. Then having said that, I feel uncomfortable with that because
why?
It's okay to say that it's all right to commit those offences as long as it's not in the UK.
No, no one's saying that.
Do you see what I mean? That's what you sort of look at it and I think, is it okay for him to commit those offences full stop? No, absolutely not. Whether it's in this country or any other country.
Well, there's no suggestion that he would go on and commit those offences anywhere else. You can't convict someone of a crime before they've committed it.
No.
He's committed the crime here. He's got no legal right to be here. I mean, I think sort of a sense of natural justice might make one feel, well, why is he here? How can he continue to be here?
And that's why I really do understand people's concerns around this case. And Tom, we've spoken in the past, I want us to have fair, transparent, accessible processes for refugees and asylum seekers and migrants in this country. I worry about the climate of fear around migrants. And I worry that there's elements of this case that are being weaponized. You know, we saw people talking about, conveyor belts of Christian conversions, which simply aren't true. So I do think there's some dark narratives that are cherry picking some of the information around this case. But overall, if we were to step back at this, clearly, there has been failings in the way that the state identified the risk attached to this individual from a criminal justice perspective. As I said, the violence that was inflicted to someone that was known on the sex offenders register. That's a conversation we really need to have.
Yes, I agree.
I also acknowledge that there is conversations to be had around the fact that he committed these offences in the UK. And the usual processes don't seem to have been applied. I don't know the reason for that.
I'm always grateful to speak to you, Louise, and we talk about these issues a lot. And I agree with you that it would be wrong to apply to the whole an individual case and say, well, they're all wrong and whatever. And I completely agree with you that, and that needs to be guarded against.
Yeah.
But your but when saying yes, he should be deported was interesting to me. That yes, he should be deported. Yes, he should be got rid of. But does that therefore mean that we somehow tacitly approve of, or at least turn a blind eye to, potential offending somewhere else? Why would that need to be part of the consideration to getting rid of him, do you think?
I think for me, it's about whether those offences happen in the UK or whether they happen in the country. We've got someone here that was identified in our country by our criminal justice system. We've got someone who was identified as having risk attached to them. And we know with violence against women and girls, we know particularly with offences of a sexual predatory nature, there's typically escalation factors. I think that to a certain point, we as a state failed in this situation. We failed to protect that family that were attacked by him. We failed to deal effectively with this issue in this country. We don't therefore say, well, let's just export him to another country so that he can hurt another family. The warning signs were here.
But why?
Our criminal justice system identified him. We should have dealt with it effectively at that
So
stage.
the question is less about the risk, it's who assumes the risk, who takes on the risk. And I come back to my question, which is why should it be my listeners, the taxpayer, this country? Why? He has no legal right to be here.
Because we were aware of the risks that he presented, that was subject to criminal prosecution. And when we become aware of someone presenting a risk to women, surely we have an obligation to discharge that risk effectively. I don't think we did that in this case. Well, we clearly didn't, because he was put on the sex offenders register. I think he was given a suspended sentence. And then he went off there and did it again. We know that these offences escalate. Surely we can do better than that. The decision seems to be either do nothing or remove him to another country that they may not be aware of the risk factors that he presents, because he hasn't been prosecuted in their country. So are we just saying that those are the two options here? Either do very little or remove him and don't engage in any of the risks that he presents.
Really good to talk to you.
I feel uncomfortable with both of those options.
Yeah, really good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on, Louise. Louise Calvey, independent refugee and asylum specialist. There's, I think, at least an attempt at a case to say what parts of this went wrong and perhaps why he could have stayed in the country. I'm not buying it personally.